Hi everyone, my name is Molly McCarthy-Cunfer and I work for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, Division of Sport Fish. Today I'm going to show you a really cool way to use the entire fish when you catch one, not just those nice fillets that we all like to cut off. Today I'm going to show you how to use the head and the spine, which are left over once you take those fillets off. We're going to make a really nice fish stock. It's very easy to make and you and your family will love it when you give it a try. So let's get started. So to make a really good fish stock, the only materials that you really need are some fish carcasses, and then I also like to include garlic, onions, carrots, and celery. That adds a really nice flavor. And then I always put in a few bay leaves and salt and pepper. A lot of other people like to use parsley, but I don't have any of that on hand, so we're gonna go without it. So the first thing I'm gonna do is start cutting my vegetables to put in the pot. So I'm just gonna remove these tops of the celery. And you can throw whole big pieces. You don't have to cut these into little tiny pieces. You can just leave big pieces because once they're all cooked, you're actually going to just kind of mush them through a colander or strainer. So don't waste your time cutting them into small pieces. Same with the onions. All you need to do is get that skin off of them, cut them into a few chunks, and then you're good to go from there. I like a really flavorful broth with a lot of veggies in it, but if you want to just highlight the flavor of the fish, you could just add the fish and salt and pepper. It's kind of up to your taste, but like I said, I always like to add a few veggies in the mix. All of my excess, I have a compost bin in my backyard, so I haven't just been haphazardly throwing celery heads on my floor. I've been actually adding them to a compost bucket that I'll bring outside. So the next thing I like to add is garlic. You can find some recipes for fish stock online that tell you a specific amount of vegetables. Like I said, I like to add a lot to mine to add a lot of flavor, but so check out, there's some recipes online that show, 1 clove of garlic. You can really play with a few different recipes to see what your family likes. All right, so those are done. I am still going to peel my carrots before I put them in. So I'm going to do just a quick peel on these guys. Cut the top off and cut them into a couple of pieces, and then those will be ready. I like to do my veggies first because once I start working with my fish, my hands are nice and slimy. So it's nice to get these out of the way before you start working with your fish. Okay, all of my veggies are cut up. I'm going to add these to my compost, and then I'm going to get ready to start working with the fish. Okay, so we just went fishing last week, and I happened to save a king carcass and 2 sockeye. So you can see on these sockeye, they've been filleted and the guts have been removed. So we're left with this spine and the head of the fish. This isn't completely ready to just throw in the pot yet. I have one more step to do, and that last step is actually removing the gills of the fish. So that's this area right here. If you leave them in your soup stock, it can lead to it tasting really bitter. So you want to make sure that you cut those out and then rinse any remaining blood off. And you can see this is part of the bloodline on the fish. I'm going to want to get that rinsed off before I put it in the pot. So to remove the gills, it's a really simple process. I use just a pair of good kitchen cutting scissors, and I come in here and I just work my way down to the very base of where they start, and I just make a nice snip. And then you're just going to have to move your fingers around in here to make sure you're getting all of them out. But it's basically just wrestling around a little bit and doing a few snips to get those gills out. So if you're already in the field and you're thinking that you are going to want to make these heads into soup stock, you're going to be breaking these gills anyways to bleed the fish out. So it might be a good idea if you have a pair of scissors just like this with you to cut these out from the get-go, and then you won't have to deal with that later and your fish will bleed out nicely. Okay, so this first fillet I started with is complete. I've rinsed it off, the gills are removed. I'm going to put it in my pot and get started on the next one. So I'm on to my final fish, the king. I just finished removing the gills from it, but I did want to note that this one I froze previously and it was a little frosty, so getting those gills out was a challenge. So if you do this, if you're planning on making a big batch, which I would recommend waiting until you have a good amount of heads and then doing a bunch at once. If you're waiting to do a big batch, I would cut the gills out before you freeze them. That way, if the fish are still pretty frozen, you can just throw them in the pot because they will thaw as that water is heating up. But if you don't remove the gills first, you are going to have to thaw that fish before you throw it in the pot. Just a suggestion. So here's my king head. Gills are removed. I'm going to just give it a rinse. Now I'm noticing that with the amount of veggies that I like to put in and the fish that I have, I actually have enough to make 2 really good pots of soup stock. So I'm going to separate this out into 2 separate pots so I can get more bang for my buck. Okay, so I have now separated my fish into 2 separate pots with all of the veggies. So the next step is to just add water. So I'm just adding enough water that it covers everything inside the pot. You don't want to fill this so tall that when it's simmering, you're going to have all of it bubbling over. There's going to be some foam that you're going to have to scrape off the top of this. So I'm probably going to fill this pot about 3/4 of the way, same with the other one, to get them started. So the final step before I put these on the stove, I like to add my spices. So I'm going to throw in 2 bay leaves in each. I always like to use bay leaves. They add a good flavor. Remember to take these out when you're done. And then I just sprinkle in some salt and pepper. Okay, I think these are ready to go on the stove. So the next step, I'm going to put these on the stove on a medium to high heat. The important thing is you don't want this at a rolling boil. You want these to be at a nice simmer. So it depends on what your stove settings are, if you've gas or an electric range, but you want to add just a nice low simmer. So this could be medium low on your stove. Just be aware of that. It's going to simmer like that for 30 minutes and then it'll be ready to take off and move on to the next step. So I'm going to get these on the stove. So I've got both of these on just a little over medium to get started. Once they start simmering, I will set my timer for 30 minutes and I'll just stay close to the kitchen so I'm ready to go. If there's any foam buildup, I'm going to want to shave that off the top so it doesn't boil over. So I'm going to be on the lookout for that for the next 30 minutes. Okay, so both of these are at a nice low simmer. At this point, I'm going to set my timer on my stove for 30 minutes and let these go. There is a little bit of foam buildup on the top. So just like with anything else, if you've got some foam, you can, I'm going to stir to make sure I'm not scooping all my spices out, but you can just kind of shave it off with a spoon and put it in a bowl off to the side or down your sink or whatever you prefer. But this isn't too bad, so I'm not going to really do a whole lot. But at this point, in 30 minutes, this will be ready for the next step. Okay, so my timer is going off. I'm going to shut that off and I'm going to turn the heat off on these. Now you can let these cool down for a while so that you're not dealing with hot soup. I would encourage you to let them cool down for a little while before moving to the next step. Or if you're in a rush, you can get right into it. You just need to make sure that you're wearing oven mitts and being cautious that this is very hot soup. So we're going to move along to the next step, which is straining. Okay, so I've got my oven mitts on. I'm going to grab my first pot and dump it through my colander. So you want to make sure that you have a colander set over a bowl so that any fish bones or anything like that gets caught in that colander. I have a very nice clear broth under here that I can use. My bowl is full, so I'm going to transfer some of this into a different bowl, and then I'm going to still use everything that's in this pot to help flavor my broth. So I'm going to just move this into a different bowl and then continue along working through this. My bowl of nice clear stock is full. I just rinsed out the pot that I originally cooked it in. I'm actually going to pour this back into the pot, and then I'm going to use my strainer and kind of mash my veggies and get any remaining good flavor out of this that I can into this bowl. All right, so I transferred that. Now I'm going to again put my colander on top of here, and this is the point where I'm going to just take a spoon and mash my veggies to try to get any juices out of there and flavor out of there so that I can make sure that it's in my soup stock. Okay, so I've actually recruited my potato masher, which has been very helpful. And I've mashed out the rest of this. Now, like I mentioned, there's some good fish in here, but I'm also noticing a lot of bones. So if you want to pick through this and get some of those bones out and eat it, this would be delicious. Just be careful watching for those bones. So I've mashed this down, and you can see there's a little bit of liquid left. That contains a lot of good flavor from all of the veggies and the fish that I just mashed. So you'll notice this also isn't perfectly clear because my colander has big holes. So if you want a perfectly clear soup stock, you probably shouldn't add this to it, or you can run it through a coffee filter before pouring it in. That will catch all of those bits of carrots and onions, and you'll get that nice clear stock running through it. However, it doesn't really matter that much to me, so I'm just going to pour this directly in. So I have one pot done. I'm going to move along to the next one, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what you can do with this. Okay, so I finished straining out all of my fish stock. At this point, you're basically done. What I would do is you can either put this in your fridge as is, and it will stay good for about 5 days. However, I would highly encourage you to, as a next step, I would put this into canning jars. I would get out my pressure canner and I would pressure can this stock, and then it can be shelf stable in your pantry for up to 1 to 2 years. So if you want to do that, you can head over to our video on how to can salmon. It has the very same basic methods. You would just put your fish stock in the jars and follow your canning instructions for stock. It's going to be a shorter time period than raw fish itself. So that is another option that you have for this, or consume it within 5 days. What do you use fish stock for? There are a lot of really cool uses for it, but one of my, obviously for soups is one really good way, but one of my favorites is just to mix it in with rice when I'm cooking rice, and you can make a really good shrimp fried rice with some good flavoring. There are a multitude of other uses, so I encourage you to make some and give it a try in some of your favorite recipes. Thanks for joining us today, and I hope that you make some great fish stock at home this summer fishing season.